Hello my friends, as you know there is the standstill situation on the front lines. The front lines are actually boiling, but neither of the side is capable to achieve results as before in 2022, 2023, 2024, and there were occasional big territorial gains for Russia the last year, 2025. But what we see now, that they completely bogged down, and Ukraine doesn't have enough military resources to counterattack, as it was with the Great Kharkiv operation back in 2022 or Kherson counteroffensive that led to the liberation of that very important city, which was the biggest Russian gain since the start of the war. But this year something has changed. Ukraine, with the mass producing of the drones, with expansion of the kill zone, was capable to basically stop Russian army, all of their offensives. What Russians might do now is to gain some of the tree lines, fields, very small villages, and sometimes, as it happened the last months, Ukraine gained more territories. So the question goes, how Russia might resolve this issue, because their political leadership is still focused on achieving the goals of the special military operation. And they used all kinds of the weapons in Ukraine, cruise missiles, ballistics, artillery, everything except nuclear weapons, tactical nukes, strategic nukes. That is what left in the sleeve of the Russian army. Some people say that those missiles will not fly, they are not maintained. Well, Russia has many of those, and I wouldn't count that Soviet-produced missiles are really not that capable. Or Russian-produced, and not just missiles, but nuclear warheads. So Russia has this potential, Russia has the weaponry to use on Ukraine at any freaking moment. Even by the time I'm recording this video, Russia may already launch missiles on Ukraine to achieve the greatest victory of all time for Putin. And multiple of the Russian Z military channels, they're calling Putin to nuke Ukraine. Remember those Sarmat mobiles, they're called, those crazy guys who install the carton imitation of the Sarmat missiles or any kind of the missiles on their vehicles, and they go on parade just like that. They demand the exclusive power to be granted to Putin, as he doesn't have this power or something, to basically put coordinates of Washington in the flight tasks of those strategic nuclear missiles. Well, that's the cult. They think like that. Well, anyways, this idea has some of the support among Russian society, and especially within Russian Z-patriot community. They are calling even to use tactical nuclear missile, tactical nuclear warhead on some of the places in Ukraine, like for example frontline, and it will help Russians to break through and occupy vast Ukrainian territories. But there is a big problem with using even tactical nukes on Ukraine, and in this video I'm gonna tell you why do I think that Putin will not use nuclear weapons. Well, at least not in a visible perspective. Right guys, just a short break. Please don't forget to press like to this video and also subscribe for the channel. It really helps a lot. And if you can, of course, you may support my job on Patreon. The link for it is in the video description right below, or join membership of the channel by pressing button join if you watch me on YouTube. My friends, you're the best, you're awesome, and you are making this content possible. Let's continue with the video. And just 3 days ago, Davydov, who is now head of the President's Office of Ukraine, and he used to be the head of the military intelligence, he told that Russia may use nukes any moment on Ukraine. But at the same time, Davydov says that they don't see any sort of the sign, not a single one, that Russia is getting ready for some of the nuclear attack on Ukraine. This intention is absent, despite on dead-end situation for the Russian army on the front lines, despite Ukrainian strikes in Moscow, and despite the Ukrainian special military operation that happened in 2024, attack on the Kursk region. Ukraine dared to enter the territory of the enormous country, Russia, nuclear superpower. Russia has the biggest number of the nuclear warheads if you count altogether, tactical and strategic ones. But nevertheless, despite all of the red lines being crossed by Ukraine and before, Putin is not using that. Moreover, just yesterday, or maybe the day before yesterday, Peskov said that Ukraine does not possess existential threat for Russia, even with those attacks on Moscow. Peskov was asked, I was really surprised about this question, by journalists that, okay, we have those bombs, he meant nuclear bombs. But we are being beaten by Ukraine, and they neglect our power, our bombs, all of that. And Peskov says, well, if there was the existential threat for Russia, we would have used, and this is the weapon of deterrence, it is like the last resort. And journalists say, oh, so in case of the existential threat only, Peskov says yes. So all of this bluffing from Putin. And he said, oh, if Ukraine attacks us using Western-made weapons, we're going to retaliate, we're going to target those bases, we're going to target factories in the Western countries. All of that is basically nothing burger, empty threats, empty blackmail, and so on. Before, Putin said like that multiple of the times, just to threaten our allies, for them to think about Ukrainian military support, to think about whether they should confiscate Russian assets in European banks, to cause this chaos among MAGA influencers. Just recall the end of 2024 and how Joe Rogan was screaming, Tucker Carlson and all of those kind of the influencers. They told that Ukraine is up to start the Third World War. Joe Biden allowed Ukraine to use ATACMS. If Ukraine uses it on Russia, we're doomed, we're cooked. We're gonna enter the Third World War. Russia will strike us. Joe Rogan was swearing, what the hell are they doing there? Trump just won elections and Joe Biden is evil, Joe Biden is devil. Yeah, especially right now than we see with this war in Iran. Okay. By the way, today there were more news published by legacy media saying that Donald Trump is looking for a military scenario on Cuba. So the main thing why Russia is not going to use nukes on Ukraine, will not use those. In nearby perspective, in middle perspective, in long term, we'll see, okay? Because I am partially Baba Vanga here, Nostradamus. Yeah, I don't really like to give predictions, but here I'm almost sure, like 99.9%, I'm sure that Russia will not use nukes on Ukraine ever, because it is simply illogical. Military goals are not going to be achieved even in that kind of scenario. But opening this Pandora box, Putin is risking a lot with his allies, with his adversaries, potential adversaries. To understand why this move is not profitable for Russia, we need to play that scenario. For example, okay, strategic nuclear weapons. They've been launched on, for example, Kiev or any sort of the big city in Ukraine. Will Russia attack all of the cities as they proclaim they liberate Ukraine? I don't think so. Let's play the scenario they demolish one of the big Ukrainian cities. But immediately after that, Russia will be put under the brick. They'll have so many sanctions. They'll be outcast in the world. Even China would say, what is happening in Russia? This is too much. China openly says that all of the nuclear confrontation should be avoided by any sort of the coast, because China also has questions, territorial issues with India, with Pakistan. They also have nukes, and China has nukes. So this is very dangerous. It is also unprecedented. It would show that if you give up your nukes, as Ukraine did with Budapest Memorandum, sending all of the warheads to Russia, you might get nuked. And all of the countries across the globe, they would start to search of how to obtain nuclear warhead and how to build those ballistic missiles, because they're harder to intercept. Well, partially, it is already happening. Just look at Iran. And Oman Prime Minister, I guess, maybe it's Prime Minister, maybe some other official, he said that because of the Budapest Memorandum, because of that, the world understood that even big countries as United States, Russia, United Kingdom, those countries who have kind of big military and nuclear weapons, they simply do not keep their promises, and they do not protect those countries or allies, actually, whom they promised to protect. But with actual use of the nukes, it's gonna be even worse. So Russia would lose all of the allies. Maybe just North Korea would stay, maybe not. But that would be the total devastation for Russia economically, politically. The remains of reputations will be gone. And also there could be some of the retaliation strikes, definitely some outrageous ones on Russia, because Ukraine actually has capabilities to build dirty bombs, so-called. Yeah, Ukraine is not building it. But in case of the actual nuclear strike on Ukraine, I'm sure that Ukrainian military will go full in and those drones will carry dirty bombs on Moscow, and it will bring nuclear fallout, and Moscow, as the capital of the Russian Federation, would be just gone, with tons and tons of the casualties. Thousands of those potentially high-ranked Russian officials are included. And the second thing, that this strike on Ukraine, any sort of nuclear strike, will not cause Ukraine to give up, to stop resisting and to say, oh, Russia, you hit us, oh, we need to surrender to you because we need to avoid more kind of those strikes. No, Ukrainian resilience will stay the same. Ukrainians will just go full berserk mode against Russia, like full scale. Every tool which could be thrown against Russians would be used, and even Russian civilians, because if Ukrainian civilians suffer that much, oh, there's gonna be a revenge from Ukrainians, from all of them. Also in Ukraine there is no central decision-making point, and for example in Kiev they're underground bunkers and they will survive even a nuclear strike. And for sure American and European intelligence would warn Ukraine about the imminent strike, that it's gonna happen that date, that time, and where it will happen. And Putin knows that, because even tiny small details of his special military operations, they were publicly available before he started it in 2022. The other thing, that the Ukrainian government wasn't really prepared properly for the full-scale aggression of Russia, but that's the other story for the different video. So of course nuclear strike will not disable Ukrainian government, military command, it will just cause severe losses among civilians. That's it. That's the goal of the nuclear strike. That's the main risk for Russia, to cancel its economy and go underground. So you see that nuclear weapons, it's the huge power, but at the same time it is a weakness, because by the time you use those, you can expect unexpected circumstances. It is hard to foresee what it could be. Well, nothing good for the country which is being attacked and for the country that might launch this nuclear strike. And for this reason nuclear strikes didn't happen for a very, very long time. The first and the last time they were used against people in Japan. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, why was it done back then? To force Japan for capitulation, or to show Soviet Union of how mighty American weapons are? I think both. By the way, back then nuclear weapons were not that powerful as today, and Hiroshima, Nagasaki explosions, well, you may compare those to the modern day, some sort of the tactical nuclear warhead. Well, maybe just a little bit more powerful. Alright, about tactical nuclear weapons. The circumstances for Russia in case of use of the tactical nukes somewhere on the front lines would be absolutely the same as if they used strategic nuclear weapons, because those are nuclear weapons, and here is also a nuclear weapon, just the smaller kaboom, but the Pandora box is the same. Someone used nuclear weapons. So sanctions, economy, outcast in the world, and the same reaction from Ukraine. Potential use of the dirty bomb, which could be built from the waste of nuclear power stations. But at the same time, the actual use of the tactical nuclear weaponry somewhere on the front lines is absolutely meaningless, especially right now that the density of the front lines for Ukraine, for Russia, it is miserable. Compared to the Second World War, compared to what was expected in the confrontation between Soviet Union and NATO, frontal wars, it's nothing. It is not even close. Tactical nuclear warheads, well, the idea is just to create a huge bomb, a blast that would demolish some of the enemy positions, enemy soldiers, enemy vehicles, to break through, to penetrate with a blitzkrieg attack, go behind the front lines and go forward, forward and forward. Russia doesn't have those kind of the forces right now to go forward. They just bog down. They're in lack of the infantry, they're in lack of the vehicles. And moreover, there is nothing to penetrate, because Ukrainian drone operators, they're staying in the basements, they operate from those and they hit Russian vehicles, civilian cars, was Bukhanka vans, which Russia is using. Yeah, civilian cars, it doesn't mean that there are civilians inside. Just Russia is using Lada or something like that. Niva, yeah, Niva is very popular. So if they use, for example, Iskander ballistic missile with a tactical nuclear warhead on Malatakmachka, and It would not be enough even to demolish Mala Takhmachka, by the way. According to initial calculations, and I've took it from one of the channels, it is Russian-speaking Michael Naki, and I got the idea also for this video on his channel. Well, he says that Ukraine, in the worst-case scenario, could lose 50 of the soldiers in Mala Takhmachka in case Russia uses tactical nukes. Because the ground zero for the small warhead is not that big, few hundred meters. The rest is the shock wave, but our guys are again in the basements, usually. Yeah, there could be also some of the radiation fallout, but for the tactical nukes, it's not that high, let's say. I remember some of the old videos of the Soviet times, how they tested tactical nuclear warheads and how Soviet Union sent soldiers straight to the ground zero. Explosion happened. Yeah, for those tests, they built the town, they sent soldiers there, but those were BMPs, those were tanks. Soldiers were not running there to nuclear fallout. Well, infantry was also used, but not on ground zero. And now Russians will attack on what? On Niva, on Lada vehicles without any sort of the radiation protection? It's useless. And there will be no breakthrough because there is another defense line with more drone operators from behind, from the sides. So all of the Russian soldiers will face the same reality. Ukrainian drones, which may fly by 20 kilometers, by 50 kilometers. How can you penetrate this kill zone, which is virtual? It doesn't exist. Some defense lines, they do exist, but Ukrainian infantry is no longer in the trenches. Ukrainian infantry is hidden underground. There are special trenches built for the infantry with a roof nowadays, or they're just sitting in the basements of villages, of the houses, as usual. Now Ukraine tries to minimize the use of the infantry and just separate brigades are counterattacking. Very capable ones, fire brigades we call them. But there's no front of war, as it was expected between NATO and the Soviet Union. Back then, the strategy was to break through the enemy defense, and all of the necessary means were built by Soviet Union. That's why they have those kind of the tanks, which are in lack of the armor, but they're light, they're capable to run very fast, to penetrate defense. Blitzkrieg, that is what Germans showed in the Second World War. The strategy was like that for a very, very long time, but now everything changed. First of all, world economy, it's integrated. There are just few of the outcast countries left, like North Korea. And even Russia is a good partner for many. So using strategic nuclear weapons will absolutely cut those connections. For Russia personally, it will become an outcast even worse than North Korea. And for tactical nukes, it's basically the same, but it's even worse because even tactical success is unachievable with the tactical nuclear warheads. Well, some people say, and I think it was a Secretary of Defense of the United States back in 2018, that there is no tactical nukes any longer because it will lead to the same circumstances for the country using those. So tactical, strategic, the result is basically the same. And this Putin's nuclear bluff, it's not the first time in the history. By the way, Americans also used the same tactics or the similar ones during the Vietnam War. President and Secretary of Defense, they were telling, oh, maybe we're gonna use nukes. They delivered those messages to the press, to Soviet side, for Soviets to cancel the support of Viet Cong. But it didn't work, and Americans didn't use those nukes because it is freaking useless. The same useless as in Ukraine. So as the weapons of deterrence, nuclear weapons, they play a great role. But as the weapons to force someone for something, it's usually no-go. For example, with those red lines, once again, and the Ukrainian Kursk operation. So Ukraine knew that Russia has nuclear weapons. It's a very well-known fact. Ukraine also knew about all of those threats and red lines, which Putin personally put for Ukraine and the Western partners of Ukraine. If you penetrate those, you'll be harmed. Nevertheless, Ukraine went and attacked Russian Federation directly. Kursk Oblast, massive evacuation, Ahmad army runs away, panic attack, Putin in his bunker. What the hell is happening? Should we use nukes? No, you just can't, because it will harm you personally. And knowing Putin, the way how he likes his life, he is for sure the richest person in the world. Not Elon Musk, no, but if you count everything that Putin owns, maybe not personally, maybe Russian government, but everything of that is personally for Putin, He's the richest man, and he's probably one of the most powerful men, but even he cannot use nukes, right? Because the circumstances for him could be dramatic for his power, for his personal life, and also for his relatives, for his circle, for his FSB officials, for his oligarchs. He might put everything under direct threat. So he is not a suicide guy, and he definitely thought that he would occupy Ukraine. He received those fake reports from FSB, from those pro-Russian parties in Ukraine, and Medvedchuk, who is a very close friend of Putin. And they told Putin, okay, Ukrainians are waiting for you, Putin. Just go with some forces and take Ukraine, because they'll greet you with flowers. And it was the calculation of Putin back then. And when it didn't happen, Putin was shocked. It was visible on him. Ukrainian army commanders, you need to rise against your government, and with you we're gonna achieve some sort of the resolution, some negotiation, yeah? But it didn't happen, and Putin was definitely surprised. He was shocked. Cameras were filming him, and he was with those huge eyes. What the hell is happening? And after all, because he didn't expect that, supplies were absent for Russian army in the Kiev Oblast, Chernihiv. They were basically under the threat of being encircled. Putin had to withdraw the forces, calling it a goodwill gesture. And since that time, goodwill gesture happened at least 2 of the times, in Kharkiv Oblast and in Kherson. Yeah, the goodwill gesture also happened with the Moskva flagship, but Ukraine helped with that. So from what I see, how Putin might get out from this dead-end situation for him in Ukraine is just announcing a new massive mobilization. First of all, he already did it in 2022. Yeah, it was an unpopular step, and it will not be popular, but at least he is not risking that much as with nuclear weapons. Yes, it is also a great risk for Putin's power, but it is the only variant that I see if he really wants to achieve some sort of the propulsion, some sort of the territorial gains, and finally occupy Donbass in a matter of maybe 5 years already, judging on how they move. But in this case, I think Russia should mobilize around 1 million soldiers, because the losses could be astronomical. It would be nothing that we have seen before, and Putin tries to avoid this step. You know, I was criticizing a bit the previous White House administration, Jake Sullivan, for example, National Security Advisor of the White House. Do not escalate, we don't want to escalate, and still our partners, majority of them, they have the same rhetorics. But Putin is exactly like that. He doesn't want to escalate, and he does everything to avoid the possible mobilization, or we're not even speaking about using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. It's no-go for Putin personally. I'm sure about it. Yeah, because of the reasons I have just told you in this video. So I do not believe that Russia may use nuclear weapons. And the condition maybe for Putin to use the nukes, well, maybe direct threat for his life, or direct threat for losing his personal power in Russia. If somehow he would think that using nukes could save him, maybe yes. But again, launching nuclear warheads on some of the country, it is unconditional. So there are no red lines for this decision. The only possible red line is Putin's life, or Putin's power. The rest of the red lines have already been crossed by Ukraine multiple of the times. And if NATO would deploy its forces straight to the front lines, even in this case, Putin would not use nuclear weapons. It is understandable, I guess, for everyone, except those do not escalate guys. So yeah, my friends, I've decided to yap about this topic because sometimes I get the questions, what do you think about nuclear weapons? Oh, Russia is the mighty country, it might strike Ukraine with nuclear weapons, Ukraine will be devastated. Well, this is my reaction. This is what I think on this channel. I could be not correct, I could be not right, but judging on my logic and what is happening and all of those crossed red lines, I do not see how Russia may potentially use nukes on Ukraine, but it will continue to threaten with nukes all the time. Putin, Medvedev, everyone, yeah? And guys, please support my channel on Patreon, the link for it is in the video description right below. You may also press button join to join membership of YouTube channel if you watch me on YouTube, because I also post on Spotify. By supporting the channel, you are making this content possible. My friends, you are the best. And also please don't forget to press like to this video and subscribe for the channel. It also helps a lot. I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.